let's cross to Donetsk. And Ole Solvang, Senior Emergencies Researcher at Human Rights Watch. Thanks for being with us. First of all, tell us how far you are from the airport, and can you hear shelling?
I'm in the center of the city, so perhaps 10 kilometers or something away from the airport. And I have to say that this weekend in particular, Saturday night and Sunday morning, we heard some of the most intensive shelling that I've ever heard. There was sounds of incoming and outgoing fire every couple of seconds. Things have calmed down a bit now compared to what it was this weekend, but we can still hear the occasional explosions, occasional incoming and outgoing fire from several different parts of Donetsk.
And I guess the question everyone's asking is who, and it's a very specific question, who's firing at who?
Well, I think, you know, the two sides are firing at each other, the pro-Kiev and the anti-Kiev forces, or the government forces and the separatist forces. There are many names that are being used. But what we are here, what Human Rights Watch is here to do, is to also document how this impacts civilians. There have been a number of civilians who have been killed in this fighting since it flared up, both in opposition-controlled territory and in government-controlled territory. And there are really two violations that we're looking into. One is that to see whether forces are firing from residential areas and thereby endangering civilians. And then the second one is to see whether attacking forces are using indiscriminate weapons and thereby unlawful attacks as well.
Any early conclusions on that?
Well, we have definitely documented that forces have been firing from populated areas here. We have also documented several cases that were clearly unlawful. Unfortunately, it's not so that every single civilian death is a violation, so it sometimes requires careful assessment of the situation. But it is important that all sides, all parties to this war, take even greater care to make sure that civilians are spared and to minimize civilian casualties.
Ole Solvang, we're going to look at some of the photos that you've been putting out on Twitter, including the funeral of a 4-year-old boy. Tell us about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, it has been a pretty tough day emotionally. That is, we had a funeral today. There was a funeral today for this 4-year-old boy who was killed a couple of days ago. And I think it is a good illustration of some of the violations that we're looking into. It was not only the 4-year-old boy, his mother, his brother, his grandmother was seriously injured in this attack as well, as were 2 other civilians in that area. One of the main problems was that it seems, based on our investigation, that separatist forces had established a base and were firing from near his home, from a residential area. And then what it appears like government forces responded to that, trying presumably to hit that base, but several of the shells fell in other places. And we have grave concerns about the use of these kinds of heavy artillery shells in populated areas like this.
All right, from what you're saying on both sides. Ole Solvang, another picture that struck us, it's of an old man in the rubble in Donetsk. Where was that taken?
That was taken just in a small village just south of Donetsk here. And his daughter, his son-in-law, and another civilian was killed in an artillery attack there Friday, I believe it was. And we arrived there Sunday morning, shortly, sort of the day after. Another very much heartbreaking story, and he was, of course, devastated from the loss. So it's really showing that, you know, civilians are being impacted by the fighting here.
And fighting and the firing that's been going on into populated areas by both sides. Ole Solvang, one final question. How would you describe the center of Donetsk right now?
Well, it's a bit it's a strange situation. There is a heavy, intensive war going on not far from here and on several different fronts from here, and we can hear it. And yet the center of Donetsk in some ways seems surprisingly normal. There are people out on the streets during the daytime. There are cars going around. But of course, the situation here for people is very difficult. And particularly, I think, for those who are for vulnerable groups, pensions have stopped being paid, and for retired people who are dependent on pensions, that of course becomes an additional burden. So I think for many people the situation is quite difficult in Donetsk right now. In addition to, of course, the fear of the shelling that you can sort of constantly hear from all over Donetsk.